With the horrific war in Ukraine escalating and the suffering of Ukrainian people increasing, Hillary Clinton and Tony Blair are advocating for stronger military responses. Should we listen to them? Hello, you 5.2 million shimmering souls awakening together with me on this path that we walk towards the light, both inner and outer. We're going to be talking today again, of course, about the horrific conflict in Ukraine, its consequences and the various reasons for it, and particularly commentators advocating for more egregious or at least aggressive military action from the West. And you'll recognise their names because one of their names is Hillary Clinton and the other one is called Tony Blair. And we know you guys love them, so we thought, why not talk about them? But before we get into a complex conversation about complex matters, let's get into the simple business of telling you I'm appearing live all over the UK and you can come and see me unexpurgated and free, talking freely, you and me together. I've got shows in Plymouth, Bristol, Glasgow, Newcastle and Carlisle coming up right soon. Check the link. Now, let's get into this story. Tony Blair says the West is too timid. Well, maybe for you, mate. You demand that we make up porky pie lies in order to go to war with Iraq, if I remember rightly, and I think I do. So Tony Blair, sir, I'm not even going to say it. Tony Blair has issued a veiled attack on Joe Biden and the West as he criticised the strange tactic of promising not to fight Russia. Bloody hell, that's one of the few things I thought we agreed on, is that you don't want actual combat. Do we agree on that? I don't know. I'm learning sort of slowly about this situation, but I thought escalating a conflict with a nuclear superpower led by a narcissist with a point to prove might not be the best outcome for Ukrainian people. The former Prime Minister said Vladimir Putin is using NATO's desire not to provoke escalation as a bargaining chip against us. You know what he is? He's using the fact that we don't want a nuclear war as a sort of bargaining chip. I've seen this before. Saddam tried that, bargaining chips on us before. Well, you know what happened to him. Statue down, palace is shut, living in a hole, bag on head, good night. Maybe that is our position, and maybe that's the right position. But continually signalling and removing doubt in his mind is a strange tactic. Get that bag on the old head. That's what I say. Gaddafi, here's another one. He thought he could try me out. Well, I remember seeing him jostled about in the back of a Jeep like Weekend at Bernie's. Good night. He wrote in an essay on his think tank's website. As Putin threatens NATO, stoking fears of nuclear conflict and attempting to topple a peaceful nation, there is something incongruous about our repeated reassurance to him that we will not react with force. I didn't think he'd get stuck into this one. Oh God, a war. Remember that last war? What was that? No, fuck it, I'm doing it. Give me my think tank's website. See what Hillary Clinton's been saying. We need a strong democracy in the United States. Yes, we do, Hillary. Where are the emails? To win the global argument with autocracy. A strong democracy is also a precondition to mobilising the resources necessary to deter aggression and compete economically and militarily. That's a call for more military spending. You see the Clinton Foundation? Just have a little glance at where it gets much of its funding and see if that would affect Hillary Clinton's perspectives on war, which have always been pretty favourable. By contrast, a weak and fractured democracy at home will only embolden our adversaries and invite further aggression. If you ever wonder why people are cynical about Hillary Clinton, look at this sentence again. By contrast, a weak and fractured democracy at home will only embolden our adversaries and invite further aggression. That is code for shut up, toe the line, don't dispute our narrative, because that's a weak and divided democracy. A strong democracy is a democracy where everyone agrees with one another and does exactly what we tell them to do. Caitlin Johnston writes, international law is a meaningless concept when it only applies to people the US power alliance doesn't like. Neither George W. Bush nor Tony Blair are in prison cells at The Hague where international law says they ought to be. I'm not saying that's where they ought to be. Who cares what I say? International law says they should be. Sometimes I can't even fathom that. You know, when people say bang Tony Blair and George W. Bush up, especially new George W. Bush, like doing all the paintings and being mates with Ellen, and we like him now, right? Like, but apparently, according to the old international law that they love so much, bang them up down The Hague. Bush is still painting away from the comfort of his home, issuing proclamations comparing Putin to Hitler and platforming arguments for more interventionism in Ukraine. Blair is still merrily warmongering his charred little heart out, saying NATO should not rule out directly attacking Russian forces in what amounts to a call for a thermonuclear world war. It kind of does, in a way, doesn't it? I mean, I would have thought that these highly educated, highly experienced diplomats and politicians might appreciate some of the complexity and the necessity for a diplomatic solution. When you point out this obvious plot hole in discussions about the legality of Vladimir Putin's invasion, you'll often get accused of whataboutism, which is a noise that empire loyalists like to make when you've just highlighted damning evidence that their government's behaviours entirely invalidate their position on an issue. Obviously something that we've been confronted with, attempts to censor, control, criticise and dismiss the stories that we tell, the opinions that we offer, the questions that we ask. Oh no, well, and again, look how it all toes the line. Now, those of you that believe that there is a centralising globalist conspiracy, like that WEF and Davos are all attempts to create one unifying global voice where everyone plays by the same rules, plays with the same ball, that the big technocratic powers and big tech powers all come together to govern us and make sure that we own nothing and are happy, we'll be interested to hear a statement like, by contrast, weak and fractured democracy at home will embolden our adversaries. That is Hillary Clinton saying we don't have room for multiple voices. We don't have room for dissent. Now, Caitlin Johnston points out that anyone, commentators, journalists like her, or vloggers like us, can't go, oh, that's whataboutism. That's whataboutism. Shut up. Do as you're told. Put your badge on and shut your mouth. This is not whataboutism, it's a direct accusation that is completely devastating to the argument being made because there really is no counter-argument. That's another thing. When there is no counter-argument, they attack you as an individual, or they just try and shut you down. Or they say that you're something, usually something that you're not, in order to shut you down. Or they say, in this case maybe, oh, you don't care about Ukrainian people. Or in the case of the pandemic, you don't care about people dying. I do care about Ukrainian people. I do. I'm telling you, well, if I'm telling you I do, what do you mean? Or I do care about people, but I'm a person. I care about people. Could it be, and here's another alternative theory, is it that you just don't like anybody questioning the outcomes you desire? The Iraq invasion bypassed the laws and protocols for military action laid out in the founding charter of the United Nations. It was only in our founding charter. The current US military occupation of Syria violates international law. Literally happening now. International law only exists to the extent to which the nations of the world are willing and able to enforce it. And because of the US empire's military power, and more importantly, because of its narrative control power, this means international law is only ever enforced with the approval of that empire. That international laws are only applied when they're in alignment with the agenda of powerful central elite forces. If they're not, they just ignore them. The international law says that Blair and Bush have been hate. It don't matter, it's okay when they do it. The international law says that they don't invade Syria. It's okay when we do it. International law says Russia shouldn't invade Ukraine. Yeah, right, let's get on that one. There's money to be made in that one, that's good. Now, I'm not saying that Russia aren't wrong or Ukrainian people aren't suffering. Of course, they obviously are. Tell me what I can do. And if your only answer when I ask what can I do is, don't offer any counter-narratives. Shut up. Don't talk about it. I remember 2 weeks ago, that was the pandemic, right? Don't talk about it. We just need to get everyone vaccinated. Shut your mouth. The unvaccinated are causing it. Well, where's all that now? This is why the people indicted and detained by the International Criminal Court, ICC, are always from weaker nations, overwhelmingly African. Oh, there's a theme developing. While the USA can get away with actually sanctioning ICC personnel if they so much as talk about investigating American war crimes and suffer no consequences for it whatsoever. It's also why Noam Chomsky famously said that if the Nuremberg laws had continued to be applied with fairness and consistency, then every post-World War II US president would have been hanged. Oh my God, all of them? That's mental. The US continually works to subvert international law enforcement institutions to advance its own interests, which was rejected as a slogan to go under the flag. When the US was seeking UN authorization for the Gulf War in 1991, Yemen dared to vote against it. But it's all alright over in Yemen now, right? After which, a member of the US delegation told Yemen's ambassador, "That's the most expensive vote you ever cast." That's gangster stuff. Yemen lost not just $70 million in US foreign aid, but also a valuable labour contract with Saudi Arabia, and 1 million Yemeni immigrants were sent home by America's Gulf state allies. Fucking hell. They don't like criticism, do they? Oh, we're just worried that in case there ain't no weapons of mass destruction, in case that dossier's... Right, get them fucking immigrants out, 70 million contracts, and when Saudi Arabia bomb you, don't come fucking running to us. Simple observation of who is subject to international law enforcement and who is not makes it clear that the very concept of international law is now functionally nothing more than a narrative construct used to bludgeon and undermine governments who disobey the US centralised empire. That's why in the lead up to this confrontation with Russia, we saw a push among empire managers to swap out the term international law with rules-based international order, which can mean anything and is entirely up to the interpretation of the world's dominant power structure. If we say international law, people may point out that we ourselves regularly break international law. Call it something else, something made up and a bit shit and bureaucratic and difficult to understand and dissect. How about rules-based international order? Yeah, that's pretty vague. You can argue with logical consistency that Putin's invasion of Ukraine is wrong and will have disastrous consequences far beyond the bloodshed it has already inflicted. But what you can't do with any logical consistency whatsoever is claim that it is illegal, because there is no authentically enforced framework for such a concept to apply. Right, because I suppose law is about precedent, isn't it? Like you establish the principle and then you use the precedent. That's how like your law over there works. I think our law does over here. You know, so you can't just say, what about Iraq? Oh, well, sorry about that. What about Yemen when you fuck them up? Oh, look, we're not talking about international law. This is a rules-based international order. And what does that mean? What do I fucking say it means? As US law professor Dale Carpenter has said, if citizens cannot trust that laws will be enforced in an even-handed and honest fashion, they cannot be said to live under the rule of law. Instead, they live under the rule of men corrupted by the law. This is all the more true of laws which would exist between nations. Don't you feel sometimes that the rules and regulations and laws are shifting, that the values and principles, one minute this is okay, next minute that's okay, these people can do this, these people can say that, we're meant to be fair over here, but we're not meant to be fair over there. That is no values or principles. If they value and principle means it doesn't change. It doesn't change. With true values and principles, you change in order to fit in with them. You don't change them in order to fit in with you. You don't get to make international law meaningless and then claim that an invasion is illegal. That's not a legitimate thing to do. As long as we're living in a Wild West environment created by a murderous, globe-spanning empire which benefits from it, claims about the legality of foreign invasions are just empty sounds. Now again, this is one of those times where I'm going to say, I pray and hope Ukrainian people are relieved of the horror of this war as quickly as possible. I hope the people in positions of power, whether that's within the media, the United States government, the Russian government, come to their senses and create a sensible, convivial solution, not for their own economic and political interest, but for Ukrainian people. But it seems that another layer of complexity is the inconsistency of the application of international law. And part of that hypocrisy is illustrated when you see contributors to the debate such as Hillary Clinton or Tony Blair or George W. Bush stepping forward when we know their record, when we know how their funds operated, when we know what happened in the Gulf War, if we're old enough to remember it. Look it up if you don't remember. So I suppose, again, this is another time where I'm advocating for you as individuals to get in alignment with your own values, with your own judgment, and for us to start creating fairer systems, firstly individually, then collectively, and ultimately who knows where it can lead if we stay in alignment with ourselves. If we have true values and principles, we will at least have something that they don't have. But that's just what I think. Let me know in the comments below what you think. Give this video a thumbs up, share it around. If you're not a subscriber yet, subscribe. Only 48% of people subscribe. Imagine seeing that number skyrocketing up. What that'll do for little Russell when he was a little lad and his feelings of inferiority. Do it for that guy. If you don't, it's against international law. If you enjoyed this video, have a look at this one or this one. If you want to come see me live, I'm all over the country doing a spectacular show that's literally exhausting me, but making me feel stronger just to have the contact and connection with you. If you want to be part of my mailing list, have a little click there. You'll be an immediate member of it. More importantly than any of these demands I'm making on your time is that you please, for God's sake, stay free.